Hi, I'm Deb Malone, Executive Director of the Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to another live stream presented by our Chamber of Commerce. These live stream events are produced by Grade A Communications and Mike Graham. If anybody's interested in doing a live stream event for their customers or clients, or just for the general public through their Facebook page, please contact Mike. His information is on our Chamber website. And also, these live stream events are sponsored by Westchester Marketing Cafe. Today's topic is something I know we're all concerned about, is cybersecurity. And our presenter today is Paul Smith. Now, I'm going to read a little bio that Paul sent me. Paul Smith is an expert on information technology topics, a three-time entrepreneur. He is presently the CEO of Techromatic Incorporated, an IT consulting firm that helps small businesses create and manage cybersecurity programs. Paul's unique perspective on information technology and real-world small business operations have allowed him to help hundreds of small businesses reduce risk and goals through his guidance. Paul lives in Cortland Manor with his wife and children. Now, as Paul's presentation proceeds, if anybody would like to send a question, please, send it to us, and we'll be happy to stop the presentation and answer. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Paul Smith. Paul, thank you for joining us today. And again, cybersecurity is in the news almost daily these days. And how can a small business protect themselves?
Thanks, Deb, for having me. Yeah, you're right. Cybersecurity is a huge topic these days. You can barely open a newspaper or turn on the TV without seeing an article about it. Today's topic is really geared towards small businesses and how small business owners and operators can begin to protect themselves from some of these cyber threats that are out there in the world. So to begin, I will introduce myself. My name is Paul Smith. My company is Techromatic, and we have been helping small businesses in our community, Westchester County, and also New York City, for almost about 10 years now. We serve lots of industries, including real estate, financial services, mortgage industry, healthcare, and others. We're really proud of our client retention, which is extremely high relative to industry standards. In short, Techromatic worries about your IT and cybersecurity so that you can focus on growing your business. So I want to start our talk today by talking a little bit about what's going on in the world of cybersecurity. Last year, 2017, was one of the biggest years in cybersecurity ever, and we'll probably be able to say that every year going forward. We had the biggest ransomware attack in history in 2017. That was called WannaCry. You may remember opening a newspaper or turning on the TV. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies became infected with this WannaCry virus. Also in 2017, the largest data breach in history, which was the Equifax data breach, where over half of the social security numbers of the United States citizens were stolen from Equifax. That means half of you watching this webinar probably have had your social security hacked. In addition, global ransomware damage costs have been predicted to exceed $5 billion last year and are likely to triple this year. And by 2023, they're going to go up to about 15 times. It ends up in the trillions of dollars. That trend is likely to continue. So it's obvious to us that big businesses need to protect themselves and worry and spend a lot of investment in cybersecurity. But we're here to talk about small businesses. And you may ask yourself, why do small businesses have to care about cyber? Well, we as small business owners are more susceptible in many ways to cyber attacks than larger businesses. And this is for a variety of reasons. We don't have the number of resources, money, personnel, systems in place to protect our small businesses from cyber attacks the way that these larger organizations can do. Additionally, many small business owners think it won't happen to them, that we're too small, that we're not a target, when in reality, a lot of these big data hacks actually begin at the small business level. I'm here to tell you that it is really important to focus on cybersecurity now, before you suffer a breach, not after, when it becomes much more painful and much more expensive. I want to share a couple statistics with you. 43% of all cyber attacks target small businesses. So that's almost half of all cyber attacks. They're targeted to companies like ours and a little bit larger. This is a key statistic, and it just proves that we really need to focus on this topic. 60% of small businesses that fall victim to a successful cyber attack go out of business within 6 months. That's another scary, scary statistic. 48% of all breaches are caused by acts of malicious intent. The other 52%, a little over half, well, those are caused by system failure or by human error. And finally, 78% of all data breaches are detected by an outside party. Just imagine what would happen if you have a cyber attack and your network is breached and data is stolen. That's bad enough. You've got a long list of things you'll have to deal with in that scenario. Don't add reputation management to the list. You do not want to have one of your customers or some other outside party telling you that your network was hacked and data was stolen. So I think it's important to define cybersecurity so that we can all have a context from which to have this conversation. So what is it? Well, the official definition of cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks that are normally aimed at accessing, changing, or destroying sensitive information, extorting money from users, or interrupting normal business operations. So in order for us to put a program in place to defend from these things, we need to know what it is. There are three main purposes to having a cybersecurity program. The first is to identify and assess internal and external risks that threaten the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data. Said shorter, we need to identify the risks in order to know where to spend our resources to fix them. The second purpose for a cybersecurity program is to prevent a breach of confidential information, otherwise referred to as PI, or personally identifiable information.
Paul, well, let me ask you a question. What are the most common risks for a small business?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. There are a lot of risks out there, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but employee training is probably, in my book, number one. People don't take the care with your computers. This is to say staff and people that work for a small business don't take the care with your computers that you would personally take. So it's critical that we train these people to understand how to recognize, an attack vector and do their small part in preventing. There's also quite a number of devices, like having a business firewall, things that are very weak points in our infrastructure that I'm going to hit on a little bit later. But there's quite a few risks to our small businesses, and it's really important to understand at a high level where these risks are so that we can close them. So the third piece of a cybersecurity program is to implement policies and procedures so that when a cyber event happens, not if, but when, we know how to respond, detect it, respond to it, and recover from it. And in some cases, report it to the appropriate authorities. So for those of you that are governed by an organization such as the New York State Department of Financial Services, that would be mortgage brokers, insurance brokers, anybody else in the financial services industry, well, you have this fourth reason, which is to avoid significant fines. These fines can get very hefty, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. In 2018 and beyond, I would like you to develop a new cybersecurity mindset. We have to understand that cybersecurity is not a project. It's not something that you can do once or pay a company like mine to come in and implement and then wash your hands of it and be done with it. Cybersecurity is ongoing. It's never ending. It's literally a new way of doing IT in your business. So you have to adopt this cybersecurity mindset to protect your business from hackers and fraudsters. Just to contrast how it used to be to how it has to be now, in the past, you would call your IT company when you had a problem, when a computer broke, when a piece of equipment needed to be replaced. Typically, a small business didn't have a budget for cybersecurity. Expenses were just incurred as needed. And oftentimes, the whole IT vertical in your business, and cybersecurity as well, was looked at as an expense by the business owner. Well, now it's a little bit different. Now we need to think of cybersecurity as an investment in our company's future. And so what we really need to do is define a cybersecurity posture for our organizations. We need to share it with everybody that works for us and make sure that we're all in the loop and that they're on board. So we're going to define our cyber program. We're going to have written policies and procedures that people need to follow in order to make this program work. And that's a key part, by the way, Deb, of cybersecurity, is having all this stuff written down. Wanting to do something about cybersecurity is great, but until you have your policies and procedures written down for people to follow, there's no way to keep everybody aligned. So we need to get your staff on board with this plan. Cybersecurity is a team effort. I will now take a couple minutes to discuss some of these key elements. To Deb's question earlier, what are some of the biggest risk factors? Well, let me further answer that question by explaining what the different elements of a cyber program are. If you have some of these in place, that's terrific. If you have all of them, phenomenal. If you have none of them, then hopefully you'll decide to change that after watching this presentation. First and foremost, you need to assign somebody in your business to own cybersecurity. We call this person a CISO, or Chief Information Security Officer. And in small businesses, this person tends to be the owner or the COO, somebody that's a decision maker that has a stake in the game, that will really be able to enforce any of the policies that are created for the company. Without an owner, there's no champion for your cybersecurity program, and it will wither and die. Another key element to having a cybersecurity program for your business is to conduct regular security risk assessments. Now, a security risk assessment, or an SRA, is really just a fancy way for going through a questionnaire process and answering questions about where you may have risks. And the end result of that process is developing a work plan from the security risk assessment. So the work plan is going to be a document, I like to call it a living document because we change it as time progresses, that lists out in order the different risks that we've identified for your company and a plan for closing them. So when you have a risk, you have a choice of either accepting that risk, mitigating that risk, or those are your two choices. So we want to make sure that that you're well informed to do that, and the work plan is the document that's going to help keep you on track for reducing your risk overall. Another key element of avoiding risk for your cybersecurity is to implement defensive infrastructures. So a firewall is one of the first pieces of defensive infrastructure that comes to mind when we're discussing this. Now, I get a lot of questions about a business firewall versus a router that's from Staples or Office Max or given to you by Verizon Fios or Optimum Online. A business firewall is a different thing. It's a completely different animal that does much more sophisticated types of protection than you get from an off-the-shelf router. And if you don't have a business firewall installed in your business, this is on the very, very short list of things that you ought to implement as soon as possible to help protect you. For some examples, the firewall can do things like network perimeter protection, which means it can literally scan all of the traffic coming into your network and leaving it for malware and viruses, and it pulls it out if it sees any. It can do content filtering to prevent your employees from going to sites that they don't belong on. It does logging, intrusion detection, rule-based access control, and can even sometimes prevent zero-day attacks. A zero-day attack is a virus that is put out in the wild that day where your antivirus companies have not yet found a definition to defend from it. But some of these firewalls, if they're licensed properly, can actually help prevent from zero-day attacks. So it's a major, major step up from a standard router that every business owner really, really should consider strongly. Another item on defensive infrastructure is managed antivirus. It is not okay anymore to use standalone free antivirus products for your business network. They're simply not good enough. They don't do any kind of proactive notification. So what you want is some sort of centralized tool that will report to you when a virus comes in. By centrally managing the antivirus tools in your environment, you can start to get forensics. You can see the virus came into computer A and transferred to computer B based on its time logs. And that is how it spread. And then we can address why it got into the network in the first place. And thirdly, having great backup is absolutely mandatory. When I speak with most small business owners, they say, oh yeah, we've got great backup. I'd say about half the time that we actually do a test restore, that restore doesn't work fully successfully. And so it's absolutely critical to have 2 levels of backup, something local and on-site, and also something off-network and off-site in case of a disaster. But in addition to having your backup set up, you've got to test it regularly. We suggest quarterly. So if that's not part of your existing backup solution, implement it. It's very easy to do a test restore and make sure that things are working properly. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a business that thinks their backup was working, and then we needed it and it wasn't fully working. And there's nothing like a worse feeling than realizing you may not be able to get your stuff back. Next, we want to make sure that you create this written set of policies and procedures, WISP, W-I-S-P, or Written Information Security Policies. Now, that can cover all of your IT governance, so that's where you'll list the different procedures for that. We'll include a disaster recovery plan, emergency operations, and a number of other documents. For example, there's a computer use policy. You want to have a password policy. You can have a policy that talks about your network security and your policies for giving people access to privileged information. Clean desk policy. You don't want to leave passwords taped on your, under your keyboard anymore. And of course, a BYOD policy, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. That's bring your own device and more. We, Techromatic, use a framework of 10 cybersecurity policies to encompass all of that IT governance. We also need to make sure that our systems and computers are maintained on an ongoing basis, because not keeping your systems patched and updated, and this is not just computers, this is firewalls, computers, pretty much any device that exists on your network needs to be updated. We can do that with system patches and scans. There are tools for continuous monitoring, but philosophically keeping everything up to date is a key cog in the cybersecurity wheel. I'm not sure if many of you know what multi-factor authentication is, abbreviated 2FA. This is another technology that really goes a long way to helping avoid hacking attacks. So multi-factor authentication, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. If you've ever tried to log into your bank's website online, a lot of times you have to receive a code, a text, to your cell phone or computer, and in addition to your password, you have to put this code in. Well, that is multi-factor authentication. And that's so important, because if your password does get stolen, and it may not get stolen from you, it may get stolen from a website that you have an account at, somebody can then masquerade as you. But without your cell phone in hand and with multi-factor authentication turned on, those folks will be unable to hack into a system as you. So wherever possible, we want to turn on 2FA. By the way, it almost never costs anything to turn this on. It's just you have to make a decision to do it. It's a slight inconvenience, perhaps, to your users.
Let me ask you a question regarding passwords. Everything requires a password these days. And there are now programs out there like Dashlane who actually keep your passwords for you so you do not have to remember them all. What do you think about programs like that? Yeah,
great question. I'm a huge fan of password management tools because they provide a simple way to keep all of your passwords unique and complex and long and track them. And there are Dashlane is a terrific one. 1Password is really good. There's quite a few. What you have to decide is, where is that database going to be stored? Because they all have different ways of operating. So the databases themselves tend to be very well encrypted. So I am comfortable personally putting passwords in there. I'm not a huge fan of leaving those password databases in the cloud where those services are offered. So even though they're technically encrypted with a private password that only you know, I prefer to keep it offsite. So I keep my password database in a Dropbox folder, as opposed to at the cloud with the tool that I choose to use for my password management.
Thanks.
Great. Another element to having a cybersecurity program is data encryption. And this is also something that doesn't have to cost any money, but encrypting your machines means that if you have a computer stolen or a laptop taken, that whoever takes the hard drive out of that machine will be unable to access your data. If you do not encrypt your files, then in theory, if your machine is stolen, those files will be up for grabs for whoever is savvy enough to get into them. And finally, training staff. We've talked about this a couple moments ago, but staff training for cybersecurity awareness is absolutely critical in today's day and age of cyber. And so, to that point, the weakest links in the cybersecurity chain are people, your people. So I want to talk about 5 areas where people are the weakest link. The first one is phishing, and I'm almost certain that all of you have heard of phishing. This is the fraudulent practice of sending an email that purports to be from somebody else for the purposes of getting information. A lot of times you'll see this in the form of an email that looks like it comes from your bank, and it says, we've had a problem and we need you to sign on and change your password. So you click the link and you go to your site, and it looks like your bank's website. And first it asks you for your old password, and then it asks you to put in your new password. Well, if you've gotten that far, you've been phished, and you then have to change your password because you've potentially given your banking password out to the phisher. Another way to do this is social engineering. People are very susceptible to social engineering. A good example of social engineering might be if I pick up the phone and I call you and I say, hi, this is Paul from Optimum Online. We're having an outage in your area and we need to check your Optimum online modem. Would you please walk over to the modem and read me the MAC address? And you go over, and usually it's the receptionist or somebody that answers the phone that would be having this conversation. It's very easy to kind of get into a rhythm of trusting the person on the other end of the phone. It's always good to verify, but social engineering attacks are a very common way to give people information about your network that they have no business having. Then there's this concept of CEO fraud or BEC attacks. BEC is business email compromise. This is the typical email you might have from your CEO that goes to your bookkeeper that says, hey, transfer or wire $500,000 into this account. I need it done now before the afternoon. And as amazing as it sounds, many companies do get confused by this, and many wire transfers have happened, and a lot of that money is unrecoverable. So what you'll start to see now is companies will add to their email signature, we do not wire transfer. If a wire transfer is requested, contact the CEO. They'll start to do things to really make sure that their people know not to follow instructions like this through an email. Fourth, portable media. Now, portable media like USB sticks or external hard drives are a tremendous source of infections for small businesses. And this is because by bringing them in right past your firewall and plugging them into your computer or network, you've now bypassed a good portion of these protections that you've put in place. And if you've got an infection on your thumb drive, you can inject it into the network simply by bringing it in and plugging it into your computer. Yeah. A lot of small businesses take different approaches to how to deal with this. In some extreme cases, we have customers that have chosen to disable external storage devices on their networks to prevent this from happening. In other cases, we've required encryption on all external devices, and if it doesn't have encryption built in, it will not actually load up onto the machine. So you can decide for yourself what the best way to deal with portable media is, but if you're taking away from this presentation, just know that it is an area of big risk for your company. And finally, mobile devices. 82% of businesses now have some sort of BYOD policy in place, even if it's not written down. This means that if you are allowing your staff to check email, company email, on their personal cell phones, you need to put a BYOD policy in place. Because what if they don't lock their cell phone? What if they don't have a password on it and they leave it somewhere or it gets stolen? You're potentially giving somebody full access to at least one company email account and maybe files, depending on what you allow your employees to put on their phone. So by having a policy in place, you're going to be able to enforce automatic lockouts on the phones, screensavers, forced passwords, and in doing so, you will greatly increase the security of your business. I want to take this moment in our presentation to talk about ransomware. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about ransom cloud, which is actually a new type of ransomware that affects the cloud. It's now spreading into places that it never existed before. So I would ask you to raise your hand if you've heard of ransomware, but since I can't see your hands, I'm going to assume that you've all heard of it, and maybe some of you don't know a lot about it. Well, I mentioned it earlier, ransomware comes into your computer, it infects your machine, and it crawls to the next computer looking for a server. And when it gets onto any machine, what it does is it encrypts all of your data so that you can't read it. And so when you come back to your computer and you look for your files, they appear to be gone. And oftentimes what you'll see on your screen instead is a window saying that you need to contact this email address and send them 10 Bitcoins in order for them to send you a key to decrypt your data. It's a terrible, terrible type of infection. It's really common these days, and there are some ways that we can protect from it. Just to back up some of those with statistics, a company is hit with ransomware every 40 seconds across the globe. Wow. Nearly half of all ransomware attacks infect at least 20 employees. And 72% of companies infected with ransomware have lost access to their data for at least 2 days. Talk about downtime, lost money, lost opportunity, reputational damage, and then there's a lot of cleanup and expense that has to be incurred. I want to tell you about a chiropractor story. This is a true story. A client of ours is a chiropractor. And about a year ago during the ransomware, the WannaCry attack, I got a call from him. Now, this was a doctor that was intelligent, successful. He did not make an investment in his information technology. In fact, he preferred to kind of handle it himself and only to bring us in as necessary. He had repeatedly denied my request to put a business firewall in that could have protected him from a ransomware attack. And one day he called me up and he said, "Hey, Paul, I got a virus on one of my computers. Could you send a tech?" So I sent a tech, and we went there, and sure enough, his receptionist had somehow onboarded a piece of ransomware. And it infected her computer, and it crawled across the network, and it infected the server. And all of a sudden, his practice management software, which has everything having to do with his business, was completely empty. They couldn't access patient schedules. They couldn't get patient records. They were dead in the water. The only thing they could do is wait for patients to walk in the door, assuming they had an appointment, and service them. So I said to him, "Doctor, let's restore from backup, and we'll wipe these machines and clean them out, and we'll be good to go." He said, okay. He pulled up his backup system, and sure enough, he hadn't checked it. And his backup was not current, not nearly enough to allow his business to continue operating. So he had to decide whether he was going to negotiate with these hackers. Was he going to send Bitcoin his way? Now, federal and local law enforcement will tell small business and big business owners alike never to send a ransom to a hacker, because A, it encourages them to hack more and demand more ransoms, and B, there's no guarantee that you're going to receive a decryption key. In any case, this particular doctor didn't really have a lot of options, and he decided to pay the ransom. So several days later, he had gotten his Bitcoin account opened. He paid a ransom, which he was able to negotiate with the hacker. And the hacker, fortunately, sent a decryption key. So we came back into his office. We decrypted all of his files, got him back up and running. But that's not all, because once you have a server and a workstations that have been infected with this ransomware, you can't just clean them and put them back in the environment. They're not trustworthy anymore. So we had to buy a new server in this particular case. We had to wipe the workstation and reinstall it in order to ensure there were no remnants of the malware. Overall, it cost this guy over $12,000, and he could have just simply had a little bit better practice and would have been in much better shape. So I asked him this.
I was going to ask a question then, because, you know, small businesses run on very tight margins. So a lot of times decisions are made based on available funds. So you're talking that this one chiropractor had to invest over $12,000 to get his business back up and running again. So what would be the cost of protecting yourself from the get-go and doing it correctly versus the cost of having to rebuild?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to talk on a slide later a little bit about what some of the costs might be. But it really comes down to this, Deb. I mean, companies, CEOs can decide to consider IT and cybersecurity as an investment, and they can spend some amount of money upfront to protect themselves properly. Or unfortunately, many of them consider it just a simple expense, and they don't see the value in protecting themselves. In this chiropractor's case, if he had simply had a firewall of the type I described earlier in place, there's probably a 90-something% chance that that malware would have never crossed the network transition. It would have never gotten into the network to begin with. If he had had his backup in place, which he was paying for it, it just wasn't working. If he had had, his admin test it a couple times a quarter, then we may have been able to recover easily and, not had to pay this ransom. So his costs could have really been almost eliminated by just having some best practices without even a huge cost investment. A firewall, by the way, can cost a small business anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000. So it's not an insignificant investment at all. But considering the type of protection it provides and the way that you can avoid some of these larger expenses, it's something to budget for. And that's kind of why I mentioned earlier about viewing IT and cybersecurity as an investment in your business rather than just a line item on the expense sheet. So how do we avoid ransomware? Well, if you can start by hearing some of this information I'm trying to share with you and applying some of these concepts, that's a good way to start avoiding ransomware. I think we're a little bit tighter on time, so I'm going to skip the story about Ransom Cloud, but I've seen this ransomware now infect Microsoft 365 and Google Apps. So these types of infections are just going to become more and more sophisticated, and it's really critical that we consider IT a core part of every element of our business, and an ounce of protection is worth a pound of cure. I just want to take a quick minute to talk about cybersecurity and the compliance or laws. You've all heard of HIPAA, I'm sure, or maybe high-tech. Those are federal regulations that govern the healthcare industry for cybersecurity. But the healthcare industry was a bit ahead of its time with regards to these regulations. For those of us watching, most of us are based out of New York State, and New York State, put out a set of regulations last year from the Department of Financial Services that require all companies that report to them to have a robust cybersecurity program. That regulation happens to be called NYS DFS 23 NYCRR Part 500. So it's a mouthful, but those of you in the mortgage business or the insurance business or other financial services industries, I'm sure are very familiar with it. What it basically says is that you need to use industry best practices to protect your network. And for once, New York State did a really terrific thing. They left it very flexible by letting you implement these concepts however you wish, but by requiring that you implement them to a degree that you're comfortable with. Now, the fines, if you are in this group of people that report to DFS, they can be steep. They can be up to $2,500 per day per violation. So just think of how quickly that can increment versus spending a few $1,000s on a firewall that could prevent all of this. So to get back to talking about what it might cost, these numbers are completely rough, but I did want to give you a sense, because I know as small business owners, to Deb's point, we really care what stuff costs. We can't all afford to implement everything that I may have described in this presentation so far. So a 10 to 15 person small business can possibly expect to pay between $3,000 and $6,000 annually for their cybersecurity program. Some of the ways those monies may be spent, and that's not to say it couldn't be less or more, performing a security risk assessment. You have to do that annually or when things change. So if you're lucky enough to double your business in the middle of a year, well, when that happens, you ought to perform another security risk assessment, because you can be assured that enough things have changed that require the audit to be redone. Penetration testing, vulnerability scanning, these are all things that can cost a bit of money for a small business. And they're also things that can give us a lot of confidence that we're either well protected or not well protected. Cyber insurance is a key one. If you have not spoken to your insurance broker about cyber insurance, I strongly encourage you to do that ASAP this week. Cyber insurance is a pretty affordable policy, and it can protect you from a data breach. So for example, my cyber insurance policy will cover legal costs. It covers first and third party fault. It can cover recouping your reputational damage, and these policies are now available from most business insurance brokers. So definitely.
Is that like a LifeLock or something like that? Like you see these commercials? Is that like cyber insurance? But that's on a personal basis?
Yeah, that's interesting. I never really thought about it that way. So LifeLock and things like that are personal ways to protect your identity. Some of them have money involved where they will help you recover your identity if it's stolen. It is sort of like that. But what it really is it's saying, look, assume that your company is breached and that data is stolen. You're going to have legal fees. You're going to potentially have customers that are really unhappy that are coming after you for having been hacked. You may have a third party that you interact with in some way that is affected as a result of this breach. So what a cyber insurance policy does is it offers money, and typically you're looking at $1 to $2 or more million worth of coverage to help recoup from this. So if you were to have a hacking event happen, a cyber event happen, and you were to be sued for $500,000 and you have $1 million policy, that policy would cover your attorney's fees. And if you lost in court, it would also pay out that $500,000 because these things are not covered by general liability or professional liability or errors and omissions or any other types of insurance except for cyber specifically. Some additional ways that money may be spent during the year is developing this IT governance, fleshing out these policies and procedures and getting everybody on the same page. And of course, your ongoing cyber maintenance, your patch management, your system audits, keeping your firewall licensing. So as I mentioned earlier, it's an investment. It's not free. But the cost of not investing in cyber, it's going to be so much more when you get breached. And these days, there's a good chance it's going to be when and not if.
Paul, one more question regarding, setting up policies and procedures. Is there like a template small businesses, under 5 employees can follow to make it easier for them to set up these policies, things that they should be following? Of course, there may be some unique circumstances and in their business, but is there like a standard rules or standard policies that they could look at because it may be overwhelming to them to think about, well, how do I even start with a policy and procedures for cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer the first part of the question, you can get some boilerplate language. And actually, at the end of this presentation, I offer a set of resources, including one like that'll allow you, if you're not ready to hire a company like Techromatic, to go out and get some boilerplate language that you can then customize for your company. It definitely does not make sense to do this all from scratch. As you said, it's a very sort of foreboding mountain in front of you if you have to just sit down and begin to put pencil to paper. But there are a lot of sort of commonalities from company to company about what should belong inside these policies. And by starting with a framework, something like which I'll show you in a few minutes, I think that would be a good place for a small business that's not ready to truly make a financial investment in this to start.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point out a few things that why this conversation may apply to you as a small business owner. So you have employees and potentially employee churn, depending on the type of business you're in. This means you've got a number of people touching your workstations, but those people are not business owners. They're not the chief decision makers, and they're not going to take the same care on your machines that you do. So you need to have systems in place to protect your downside from that. I'm sure that almost every single one of you watching this stores PII, personally identifiable information. You may think it's no big deal, that it's only names and addresses and I don't have social security numbers, or we're not storing credit card transactions. And I would like to argue that it's still important. You still don't want to suffer a breach. Your information is private, it's sacred. And if your customers knew that you were not taking the care with their information that you should be taking, even if it's not highly, highly, highly sensitive information, I think they'd probably be very unhappy. With employees, you're very susceptible to phishing attacks and drive-by infections. Drive-by infections, like if you have somebody that goes to a website and all of a sudden their web browser opens up with a red screen that tells you to call a phone number. Those things happen, and there are ways to protect from that, but training and keeping your employees in line is one of them. You care about your reputation. One of the biggest non-monetary problems with cybersecurity attacks is that it can really greatly reduce your reputation. And as small business owners, lots of us can't afford to have a bad reputation for having been attacked or hacked. And of course, you want to avoid downtime because, as Deb pointed out, money is tight in a lot of small businesses. And every minute and every hour and every day when you're down due to a cybersecurity event is a minute that you're not making money, that you're not running your business, and that you're not able to respond to your customers. Your IT systems are supposed to be making your life easier and protect you, not more difficult. So here are 6 things that you can do yourself to start to implement cybersecurity in your company. First, you can conduct cyber awareness training for your staff, and I'm going to send you a link for that in a moment. I put this as number 1 because the risk factor for not keeping your staff highly trained in some of the cybersecurity risks is just too great. You can ensure that all systems have current, effective antivirus protection, managed the way I described it earlier. And this doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Centrally managed antivirus products can cost as little as $3 to $5 a month per machine. It's not free, but it's not terribly expensive either. And the bang for your buck is tremendous relative to the free solutions. We can make sure that we have sufficient encryption protecting your systems and data. As I mentioned earlier, in most cases, if you have fairly modern systems, encryption doesn't cost anything. You don't need special software or hardware to encrypt your data. You just need to do it and to know that you should do it. And that's particularly important for mobile devices like laptops. You've got to test and monitor your backups quarterly. I'm sure, as I mentioned earlier, that all of you have a good backup system in place. Just add a testing routine. It'll probably take 15 to 20 minutes once a month, once every 3 months. It'll be some of the best time that you've ever spent, guaranteed. Turn on auto updating for your workstations. If you don't have an IT partner that's going to come in and patch your systems, make sure that your systems are set to auto update, because by simply leaving them unupdated, you're effectively welcoming hackers into your machine to do what they wish. And write up a disaster recovery plan for your company. There is nothing magical about it. It doesn't have to be particularly formal, but by putting this stuff down on paper and circulating it amongst your people and having them sign off and agree to it, now you know that everybody knows what their role is and what is expected of them during a disaster. So to help you with some of that, here are a few links. This first one is a link from a company called ESET. They are a very well-known antivirus company. They put out a free product that is good for home use. I would not recommend that for business, as I mentioned earlier. But they also have offered some free cybersecurity awareness training in the form of, I believe it's PowerPoint presentations. And if you go to this link that I have on the screen here now, you can download that and you can begin to circulate it to your staff and give them some fundamental amount of training that they may not currently have. This is another link to train your staff. It's from the SBA.gov. And it's a cybersecurity training tool that has videos and text for you to read. It's got a navigation for you to be able to skip around and get through. This one's a lot more involved than the one from ESET, but so therefore it'll take a little more time, but it is fairly thorough and a little bit dry, but still worth it if you are looking for something to train your staff. To Deb's earlier question, this is one website from the fcc.gov/cyberplanner. They have a tool that will allow you to download some boilerplate policies, and you can then have a framework from which to customize. So Deb, to answer your earlier question, if you download the tool from here and the documents from here, that would be a good place to get started for a small business. And if you want to conduct a risk assessment, you can do that yourself as well. The government organization that manages HIPAA has a website called healthit.gov, and on there is, they call it an SRA tool, remember SRA, Security Risk Assessment, that you can download. It's a self-contained little program. It runs on Windows computers. It's thorough and a little bit dry, but it does have all of the questions that need to be asked, and it'll generate sort of a report at the end based on your answers. so that you know where to look to close some of these loopholes. And finally, if you don't have a disaster recovery plan or an emergency operations plan, I'll be happy to send you the template that Techromatic uses. Simply email me at paul@techromatic.com. The address is on the screen, and I'll be happy to send them to you. And these are pretty much fill in the blanks. So you can go through it. You can insert your processes for what to happen in a disaster. You can document all of the different elements required in these two documents, which is disaster recovery and emergency operations. And I would be delighted to share it with you. So I would recommend that you do that rather than trying to create your own from scratch.
This has been so informative, Paul. Thank you so much. I don't know if I know I have a good firewall. I don't have to look at what else I have to see whether or not I'm protecting the chamber and protecting our computers. I think that it is these live streams I really wanted to do because I really wanted to get this information out to a broader audience. And I know our on-demand viewing has been very, very good with these live streams. And this is important information for small businesses. I just want to say thank you. You know your stuff. This has been a great presentation. I know we ran a little longer than usual. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, why don't we put up your email one more time? And how they can contact you about, as you said, templates, or about actually talking to you about utilizing your services and Techromatic services.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deb. I really appreciate it. I truly believe that this information can help a lot of our members. And if anybody does have a question, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. The contact information is on the screen, and I'd love to talk to you.
And again, you know, this is a changing world we're living in, and we try to bring you information to keep you up to date on things that small businesses really need to know and how you can protect yourself. And we're looking forward to continuing this series. I want to thank Paul again for being here today and for all the information he provided us. I want to thank Mike Graham for, again, producing this for us today. And we look forward to seeing you back in November when we're going to do another live stream on how to network effectively.